I want to start by saying I never thought I'd be making a video like this. I'm not the kind of guy who talks about personal stuff online. I've always kept my life private. But what happened over the last few months, I just can't keep it to myself anymore. And honestly, I think some of you need to hear this. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that 3 years ago, I married the woman I thought was my best friend. We met in college, dated for 4 years, got married in a small ceremony in upstate New York. Just family and close friends. Nothing fancy. But it was real. At least, I thought it was. We bought a house in a quiet suburb about 2 years ago. Nice neighborhood. Good neighbors. Safe streets. The kind of place where you wave at people when you take out the trash. The kind of place where you actually believe nothing bad can happen to you. Because why would it? You're living the dream, right? For the first year in that house, everything was good. We had our routines. She'd wake up early, make coffee, go to her remote job. I'd head out to work around 8. We'd have dinner together most nights, watch something on Netflix, talk about our days. Normal stuff, comfortable stuff. The kind of life that doesn't make for a good YouTube video, but the kind of life you actually want. And then, slowly, things started to shift. I'm not talking about a big dramatic moment. There was no single day where I woke up and thought, something is wrong. It was more subtle than that. It was like, you know when a song is slightly out of tune? Most people wouldn't notice. But if you've been listening to that song your whole life, you hear it immediately. It started with her phone. She'd always been pretty open about her phone. We weren't the type of couple who checked each other's messages. We just didn't feel the need to. But sometime around last spring, I noticed she started keeping it face down on the table. Every time. Like it was just a habit. And maybe it was. But it didn't used to be. Then came the laughing. She'd be sitting across the room, scrolling through her phone, and she'd just smile or laugh quietly to herself. And when I'd ask, what's funny? She'd say, oh, just a meme. Or nothing, just Twitter. Normal answers. Totally explainable. But something about the way she said it felt slightly rehearsed. Like the answer was ready before I even asked the question. I told myself I was being paranoid. And then our neighbor moved in. His name is Daniel. He moved into the house directly across the street about 8 months ago. Single guy, mid-30s, works from home apparently. Drives a nice car. Always well-dressed. The kind of guy who seems friendly, but in a way that's almost too smooth. You know what I mean? Like every word he says sounds like he practiced it. When he first moved in, my wife suggested we bring him a welcome gift. A bottle of wine and some homemade cookies. I thought that was sweet. Normal neighborly thing to do. We went over together, introduced ourselves, stayed for maybe 20 minutes. He was charming, funny, easy to talk to. I liked him fine. But on the walk back home, I noticed something I couldn't explain. My wife was glowing. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way she'd even be aware of, probably. But there was a lightness to her that I hadn't seen in a while. She was laughing easier, standing a little straighter. And I remember thinking, she seems happy. I didn't think much of it at the time. But I remembered it later, when everything else started adding up. Because here's the thing about suspicion. It doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps. It builds in the background while you're going about your normal life. And by the time you finally admit to yourself that something is wrong, you realize you've actually known for a while. You just didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe it either. But something was off. And deep down, I knew it. And that's when I started paying attention. Let me tell you about Daniel. Because if you're going to understand what happened, you need to understand him. Not just as the neighbor, but as a person. As someone who walked into my life smiling, shook my hand, and looked me in the eyes like he had nothing to hide. That's what makes this whole thing so hard to process. It wasn't some stranger. It wasn't someone I never trusted. It was someone I actually liked. Someone I invited into my home. Someone I shared beers with on a Saturday afternoon while my wife was inside cooking dinner. That part still gets to me. Daniel moved in on a Thursday. I remember because I was working from home that day, and I watched the moving truck pull up from my office window. It wasn't a big move. Not a lot of furniture, not a lot of boxes. Just a guy starting fresh somewhere new. Nothing unusual about that. My wife was the one who suggested the welcome gift. Like I said before, wine and cookies. Her idea, and I thought it was nice, thoughtful. That was always one of the things I loved about her. She noticed people. She made them feel seen. So that evening, we walked across the street, knocked on his door, and Daniel opened it like he'd been expecting company his whole life. Big smile, relaxed posture. Oh, wow, you didn't have to do that. But in a way that made it clear he was genuinely pleased. He invited us in, gave us a quick tour of the place, apologized for the boxes still stacked in the corner. We sat in his kitchen and talked for maybe 20 minutes. He told us he'd just ended a long-term relationship, needed a change of scenery, found this place online, and loved the neighborhood. He worked in tech, something with software. I don't remember exactly. Remote work, flexible hours. He mentioned he liked to run in the mornings, asked if there were good trails nearby. I told him about the park 2 blocks down. My wife told him about the coffee shop on the corner that opened at 6. He said he'd check it out. Normal conversation. Friendly. Easy. I walked home thinking, good neighbor. Low drama. Perfect. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing how often he and my wife crossed paths. And I want to be careful here, because individually, none of it looked like anything. She'd be getting the mail, he'd be walking to his car, they'd chat for a few minutes, she'd be gardening in the front yard, he'd come back from a run, they'd wave and exchange a few words. She mentioned him casually in conversation a couple of times. Daniel said there's a new Italian place that opened downtown. Daniel's dog. Oh, wait. He doesn't have a dog. I was thinking of someone else. Small things. Forgettable things. Except I didn't forget them. There was one afternoon, I think it was a Sunday, where I came home from running errands and found them standing in our driveway talking. Nothing inappropriate. Fully clothed, standing 3 feet apart. Completely normal body language on the surface. But the conversation stopped the moment my car pulled in, and they both turned to look at me with that half-second delay that felt just slightly too long. My wife smiled and said, "Hey babe, Daniel was just telling me about that Italian place." Daniel waved and said, "Hey man, good to see you." And I smiled back and said, "Hey." And that was it. But I sat in my car for a moment before going inside. Just sat there, trying to identify what I was feeling. Because it wasn't anger. It wasn't even suspicion yet. Not really. It was more like a low hum. A frequency you can't quite name, but can't stop hearing. I went inside. I didn't say anything. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, why were you talking to our neighbor?" That's insane. People talk to their neighbors. That's normal. That's what normal people in normal neighborhoods do. So I let it go. And I let it go the next time. And the time after that. Because every single time I started to feel that hum getting louder, I had a perfectly rational explanation ready. I was stressed from work. I was tired. I was being the jealous husband who sees problems that don't exist. I'd heard enough stories about men who let their insecurity destroy good relationships. I did not want to be that guy. So I stayed quiet. I stayed rational. I kept telling myself the story I wanted to believe. But here's what I know now. Looking back, when your gut is trying to tell you something, it doesn't stop. It doesn't care how many logical explanations you throw at it. It just keeps humming. Quiet and steady and patient. My gut was patient for a long time, but eventually I started listening. There's a version of this story where I never figure it out, where I just keep going through the motions, ignoring the signs, telling myself everything is fine, until one day it all falls apart in some way I can't control. And honestly, for a while, that's exactly where I was headed, because I didn't want to see it. I wanted my life to be what I thought it was, but the signs kept coming, and eventually, they got too loud to ignore. Let me walk you through what I mean. It started with her schedule. My wife worked remotely, had been for about 2 years at that point. Her job was in marketing, mostly meetings in the morning and independent work in the afternoons. I knew her schedule better than my own. She'd be at her desk by 9, take a lunch break around noon, wrap up by 5. Predictable, consistent, comfortable. But sometime in late spring, that started changing. She started taking walks in the middle of the day. Long ones. An hour, sometimes more. Which, fine. Exercise is good. Fresh air is good. I wasn't going to question that. But when I'd ask where she went, the answers were always vague. Just around the block. Down to the park and back. I don't know. I just walked. She'd never been a walker before. Not once in 3 years had she come to me and said, "I'm going to go for a walk." But suddenly it was 3, 4 times a week. I noticed. But I said nothing. Then came the passwords. We shared a Netflix account, a Spotify account, a couple of other things. Nothing serious. Just the normal shared digital life of a married couple. One evening, I picked up her laptop to look something up because my phone was charging across the room. I typed in her password, the one she'd had for years, the one I knew by heart. And it didn't work. I figured it was a glitch. Tried again. Nothing. She came into the room a few minutes later, and I mentioned it casually. "Hey, did you change your laptop password?" She said yes. Said her work IT department sent out a security reminder, and she updated all her passwords. Made sense. Totally reasonable. I let it go. But then a week later, I noticed her phone had a new passcode too. She'd always used a 4-digit code that I knew, not because she gave it to me, just because I'd seen her type it 100 times. But when she left her phone on the counter one afternoon, and it buzzed with a notification, I instinctively reached for it to hand it to her. And I saw the lock screen had changed to a 6-digit code. I handed her the phone without saying anything. She took it without saying anything. And we both pretended that moment didn't happen. That was around the time I started really paying attention to how she acted around her phone. And once I started paying attention, I couldn't stop noticing things. The way she'd angle the screen away when I walked past. The way she'd sometimes leave the room to finish a text. The way she'd silence notifications before setting her phone down, which meant no sounds, no screen lighting up, nothing. She was managing information. I just didn't want to admit it yet. But here's the thing that really got to me. The thing that I keep coming back to, even now. It wasn't the big stuff. It was the small stuff. It was the way she stopped asking about my day. Not in a dramatic, obvious way. She still asked. But before, when I'd answer, she'd follow up. She'd remember things I mentioned and bring them up later. She was present in a way that felt real. But slowly, that presence started fading. She'd ask how my day was, and then look back at her phone before I finished answering. She'd nod at the right moments, but her eyes were somewhere else. I felt like I was becoming background noise in my own house. And the worst part? I kept making excuses for her. She's stressed with work. She's going through something. Everyone goes through phases in a relationship. This is normal. This is just what happens after a few years together. Don't be needy. Don't be dramatic. Don't be that husband. I repeated those things to myself constantly. but there was one night that I can't explain away, no matter how hard I try. It was a Wednesday. I'd gone to bed early because I had a 6 a.m. call the next morning. She said she'd be up in a bit. She wanted to finish watching something. Normal. Fine. I fell asleep. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone immediately. The bed was empty beside me. I got up, walked down the hallway, and saw light coming from the kitchen. She was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, just the light above the stove on, typing on her phone. Fast. Focused. The kind of typing where your whole body is leaning in. She didn't hear me coming. I stood in the doorway for maybe 3 seconds before she looked up. And in that moment, in that one unguarded moment, I saw something on her face that I will never forget. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was more like the expression of someone who just realized they left a door open that was supposed to stay closed. She recovered fast, smiled, said she couldn't sleep, said she was just catching up on some emails. I said okay. I went back to bed. But I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night, and for the first time, I stopped making excuses. Something was wrong. I knew it. My body knew it before my brain was ready to admit it. And I decided that the next morning, I was going to do something about it. I want to be honest with you about something. The decision to install cameras in my own home was not easy. It felt wrong. It felt like a violation, not of her privacy, but of everything I believed about my marriage. Because the moment you install a hidden camera to watch your own wife, you're admitting something to yourself. You're admitting that trust is gone. And once you admit that, you can't take it back. But I couldn't keep living in the fog. That morning after I found her texting at 2 a.m., I got up, made coffee, and sat alone at the kitchen table. The same table where she'd been sitting a few hours earlier. And I just thought, no phone, no TV, just me in the silence and the question I'd been avoiding for weeks. What is actually going on? I ran through every possible explanation. Work stress, a family issue she wasn't ready to talk about, a mental health struggle, a surprise she was planning, a friend going through something. I tried every innocent answer I could come up with. But none of them explained all of it together. The walks, the passwords, the phone angled away, the 2 a.m. texting, the way she looked at me in that doorway. Individually, explainable. Together, something else entirely. I went to work that day, and I couldn't focus on a single thing. I sat through 3 meetings and heard nothing. I ate lunch at my desk and couldn't tell you what I ate. My mind was somewhere else completely. By the time I drove home that evening, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet, because I had nothing concrete, just feelings, just patterns. And I knew how that conversation would go. She'd have explanations. I'd have no proof, and I'd end up looking like the paranoid, controlling husband. The problem in the relationship. I wasn't willing to put myself in that position without something real. So I did what I did. I ordered cameras. 3 of them. Small, Wi-Fi enabled, the kind that look like everyday objects. I spent about 2 hours researching options that night after she went to bed. I wasn't looking for anything fancy. I just needed something reliable. Something that recorded clearly. Something that wouldn't be noticed. They arrived 2 days later. I set them up on a Saturday morning while she was out getting groceries. One in the living room, tucked behind some books on the shelf. Angled toward the front door and the couch. One in the kitchen, sitting on top of the refrigerator next to an old speaker we never used anymore. And one near the entryway, disguised inside a small decorative box my wife had bought at a flea market years ago and never paid much attention to. The whole setup took maybe 40 minutes. I connected everything to my phone through an app, tested the angles, checked the picture quality, made sure the motion detection was working correctly, And then I put my phone in my pocket and stood in the middle of my own living room and felt absolutely terrible. Because this was real now. This wasn't me lying awake at night running worst-case scenarios. This was me actually doing something. Taking action based on a suspicion I still halfway hoped was wrong. I remember thinking, if nothing is going on, I'll delete everything, return the cameras, and never tell her. I'll get therapy, work on my trust issues, move forward. No harm done. But if something is going on, I didn't finish that thought. She came home 20 minutes later with groceries and a coffee for me. She always picked me up a coffee when she went out on weekends. She handed it to me with a smile and asked if I wanted to go for a walk later. I said sure, that sounds nice. And we walked around the neighborhood together that afternoon, like everything was completely normal. She held my hand. We talked about maybe repainting the guest bedroom. We stopped at the corner and watched a dog chase a squirrel, and both laughed at the same time. It was a perfect afternoon. And the whole time, I felt sick, because I had cameras in my house, and she didn't know. And either I was about to prove that I'd lost my mind, or I was about to have my world turned upside down. That night, I checked the app one more time before bed. Everything was recording. Everything was working. I closed my eyes and waited. Пишу розділ 5. Чітко 3200 символів. Chapter 5. What I saw on the footage. I want to warn you before I get into this, because this is the part I've replayed in my head more times than I can count. The part that changed everything. And even now, telling you about it, I have to take a breath before I go further. I check the footage every evening after work. It became a ritual. Come home, say hello, have dinner, wait for her to get in the shower, and then lock myself in the bathroom and scroll through the day's recordings on my phone. Fast forwarding through empty rooms, motion alerts triggered by sunlight, the cat walking through the kitchen. For the first 4 days, nothing. Part of me was relieved. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd installed cameras in my own home for absolutely no reason. Maybe I was the problem here. But on the 5th day, everything changed. I was sitting in my car in the driveway, scrolling through that afternoon's footage. It was a Tuesday. I'd been in the office all day, didn't get home until almost 7. The footage showed my wife working on her laptop around noon. Normal. Lunch break, sandwich, kitchen counter, phone. Normal. Then back to work on the couch. And then, at 2:14 p.m., the doorbell rang. She got up, walked to the door, opened it. It was Daniel. I told myself to stay calm. People visit neighbors. That's not a crime. I kept my breathing steady. I kept an open mind. She let him in. They stood near the entryway talking, smiling. He had his hands in his pockets, relaxed. She was laughing at something he said. Still, nothing that would hold up in any argument. But then she glanced toward the window. It was a quick look. Half a second. The kind of look you do when you want to make sure no one is outside. Innocent people don't check the window. They stayed in the living room for a while. At one point, she went to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of water. They sat on opposite ends of the couch. The conversation looked easy. Comfortable. The kind of comfortable that takes time to build. After about 40 minutes, he left. She walked him to the door, and just before he stepped outside, he said something. I couldn't hear it clearly, and she smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months. That smile. I knew that smile. It used to be for me. I sat in my car for a long time after that. The screen went dark. I just stared at nothing. He'd been in my house, in my living room, sitting on my couch, while I was at work. I went back through the earlier footage more carefully, and that's when I found something I'd missed. 3 days prior, there was a 40-minute gap in the motion detection log. I hadn't thought anything of it before, but now I looked closer. The entryway camera caught something at the edge of its frame. a figure at the front door, moving quickly, gone before the camera fully registered it. It could have been anyone, but I knew it wasn't. I went inside that night and had dinner with my wife. She'd made pasta, my favorite. She asked about my day. I said it was fine. I asked about hers. She said it was quiet. Mostly just work and a walk around noon. I nodded. Said that sounded nice. We washed dishes together. Watched TV for an hour. I went to bed at 10 and stared at the ceiling in the dark, thinking about that smile. I kept watching the footage, and 3 days later, I got everything I needed. I'm not going to describe every detail of what I saw. I think you already understand what I'm telling you. But what I will say is this. It was real. It was undeniable. And there was no explanation in the world that could make it anything other than what it was. No more fog. No more maybe. I had the truth on my phone screen, recorded in my own house, and now I had to decide what to do with it. I waited 3 days before I said anything. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I needed to be completely sure I wasn't going to fall apart in the middle of it. I needed to be calm, controlled. I needed to walk into that conversation as a man who knew the truth, not as a man who was begging for an explanation. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner across the table from her. I watched her laugh at something on her phone. I listened to her talk about her day. And the whole time, I had everything I needed sitting right there on my phone in my pocket. I didn't sleep much. I didn't eat much. I just waited. On the third evening, I asked her to sit down. She must have heard something in my voice because she looked at me differently the moment I said it. Not guilty. Not yet. Just alert. The way an animal goes still when it senses something in the air. She sat down on the couch. I sat across from her. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told her I had something to show her. I opened my phone, pulled up the footage, and placed it on the table between us. I watched her face as she watched the screen. At first, she said nothing. Her expression went through about 5 different things in the space of 10 seconds. Confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like calculation, like she was figuring out how much I knew and how much she could still control. Then she said it was nothing, that I was misreading it, that Daniel was just a friend, and I was being paranoid, and she couldn't believe I had put cameras in our house without telling her. She tried to make me the problem, and for about 30 seconds, I almost let her, because that's what you do when you've spent months convincing yourself you're the paranoid one. You second-guess everything, even the things you've seen with your own eyes. But then I scrolled to the next clip. She stopped talking. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, but it felt like standing at the edge of something you can't come back from. Then she started crying, and she told me everything. It had been going on for 2 months. It started with the walks. She'd run into him. They'd talk. It became something else. She said she didn't plan it. She said she was sorry. She said it didn't mean anything. I listened to all of it without saying a word. When she finished, I stood up, picked up my phone, and walked to the bedroom. I packed a bag, just enough for a few days, and I walked back out through the living room where she was still sitting on the couch, still crying, and I told her I needed space. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it behind me and stood on the porch for a moment in the dark. And then I got in my car and drove. I didn't have a destination. I just drove for almost an hour. Through empty streets and highway ramps and back roads I'd never taken before. Just me and the dark and the sound of the engine. At some point, I pulled into a parking lot and sat there. And for the first time since all of this started, I cried. Not from anger. Not even from heartbreak exactly. more from exhaustion, from the weight of having known for so long, and finally having it confirmed, from realizing that the life I thought I had wasn't quite the life I actually had. But underneath all of that, underneath the pain, there was something else. Something quiet and steady. Relief. Because at least now I knew. At least now it was real. At least now I could start figuring out what comes next. It's been 4 months since that night in the parking lot. A lot has changed. Some things I expected. Some things I didn't. We're not together anymore. That decision wasn't made in anger. It was made quietly, over the course of several long conversations in the weeks that followed. We tried talking. We tried being honest with each other in ways we probably should have been long before any of this happened. But some things, once broken, don't go back together the same way. And I think we both knew that. She moved out about 6 weeks after the confrontation. The house is mine now. It's quieter than I'm used to. Some days that feels lonely. Most days it feels like space to breathe. Daniel is gone too. Moved out about a month after everything came out. I don't know where he went, and I don't care to find out. We never had a conversation. There was nothing to say that would have made anything better. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Was it wrong to install the cameras? Honestly, I've asked myself that question 100 times, and here's where I've landed. I installed them in my own home, not in her private spaces. I wasn't trying to control her. I was trying to understand what was happening in my own life. Was it ideal? No. Would I recommend it as a first step? Also, no. But I needed the truth. And that's what I got. Here's what I want you to take from this. Trust your gut. Not in a paranoid way. Not in a way that turns you into someone who monitors every move your partner makes. But when something feels consistently, persistently wrong over weeks and months, when your body is trying to tell you something your brain refuses to accept, listen to it. Don't silence it to keep the peace. The second thing is this. Have the hard conversations early, before the cameras, before the suspicion builds into something you can't come back from. I wish I had sat down with her months earlier and said simply, "Something feels off between us. Can we talk about it?" Maybe it would have changed nothing, but maybe it would have changed everything. I'm not angry anymore. I was for a while, but anger is exhausting, and I have a lot of life left to live. I'm okay. Actually okay. Not just saying that. If you're going through something similar right now, if you're lying awake at night with that low hum in your chest that won't go away, I just want you to know that the other side of it exists. It's hard to get there, but it exists. Thanks for watching. If this helped you in any way, leave a comment below. I read all of them. Take care of yourselves.